He would be typical of some of the family members that are very eclectic. So you have some that were very focused and had a career that basically built on every step in a similar direction. And then you have some others that seem to dart around in a variety of fields, although you can find some threads in it. In his case, he began with writing when he was at the University of Toronto. And the first involvement he had there was with what was called the Goblin, which was the local paper of the university it was created. And so he was one of the contributors and founders of that and was writing for it. He also handled some of the business aspect of promoting it as well as doing some of the writing. So he had that working for him very early on. When he married my grandmother, she also came from a family of writers, the Williams family. And so that, I think, reinforced the writing relationship. And his first jobs were at the Toronto Star. And so that seemed to be important. But even in university days, he also had a thing for entertainment and the theater. And so there's an account of his being the stage manager and even acting a little bit in a theater production at the University of Toronto with Vincent Massey and his brother Raymond Massey. Vincent Massey being the future then Governor General of Canada, and Raymond Massey, of course, going on to a legendary acting career and being well known for many parts, including the Dr. Kildare TV series. So they went back to those years together at the U of T and actually acting together in theater. And Grandpa Cowan in one account started to talk about the benefit of being not in front of the audience but behind the scenes making things work, and that became a theme of his life as well. With the Toronto Star, he was there in the early 20s, and was involved with Star Weekly and the weekly publications of that. There are a number of accounts of him in books by Morley Callahan, who was one of his friends at the Star, and others that were part of that group of people, including Gordon Sinclair and others. He was there at the time when Ernest Hemingway arrived on the scene in Toronto. Hemingway had been contracted by the Star to write some feature articles from his various places around the world. So when he was coming to live in Toronto, Grandpa Cowan already was familiar with his writing, and as Morley Callahan talks about it, it was Jimmy Cowan, as he was known there, gave him a heads up that this guy was somebody special and he could really write. And so when he came to the Toronto Star, that was the beginning of a relationship and friendship with a number of these literary characters who went on in their own ways to make a big impact on the literary scene. So they connected there during the Hemingway years. In addition to becoming good friends, Ernest Hemingway became the best man at my grandparents' wedding, which was held at 1599 Bathurst Street in Toronto at the Hemingway apartment. And the Hemingway family lived in apartment 19, and that's where the wedding was on January 12th, 1924. That was the day before the Hemingways departed from Toronto, never to return. And he went off to Paris, and many of the great things that everybody knows about his work and life really began in those Paris years. Grandpa Cowan kept in touch with him down through the years and would correspond with him in the many different places of his world. As I said, Grandpa Cowan went on to do some writing for McLean's magazine. 1930, he's credited with starting the first public relations company in Canada. And he founded that. It grew out of doing work for companies in terms of press releases and other things, but he was the pioneer in public relations. And that led him to a variety of relationships with both corporate and government activities. And among his big clients over the years was Cyrus Eaton and C&O Railways. He was the chairman of C&O Railways at that point. So he did their PR. He did PR for a number of the mining companies, including Inco and Steep Rock. He always had a fascination, too, with mining in the north, and particularly radium, which was just being discovered at that time. So one of the articles in McLean's magazine is about radium being discovered up in the very far north, up in Oh, I should know this off by heart. This is where Brian was. Further north in Alberta, where the oil sands are. This is terrible. Brian just moved from there. Fort McMurray. So he actually was up in Fort McMurray and did some traveling and research up there as part of this discovery of radium. And so he had a lifelong interest in that. I actually found documents from the 1970s at the end of his life when he was writing about this as an interest area and something that people should still be exploring for that. So it seemed to be a lifelong connection. One of the other companies he was involved with was J. Arthur Rank and the Rank Film Organization, which was a British-based company. If you've ever seen old British movies where it starts out with a gong being sounded, that was the Rank Organization. And so he represented them here in Canada and was the principal person for doing public relations in North America for the Rank Organization. So that meant many different movie stars from the British side of things came over to do promotion for their films and for other activities. And many of them would stay at the house in Rosedale where Grandpa Cowan and the family lived. And so it wasn't uncommon for my mom and the other aunts and uncles to encounter all these characters like Alec Guinness and some of the ones that would be very familiar to us, as well as the Irene Dunne and some of the others that would have been movie stars in their time. Sir Laurence Olivier was somebody he spent a fair bit of time with as well, both in promoting some of the movies and actually helping him on a movie called The 49th Parallel, which was shot up in Canada in parts of Quebec. And I actually have some of the original cells that were from that movie shoot that they did there. So he ended up with a lot of connections with the movie industry, and as part of that ended up also representing Cineplex and Odeon Films, as they would be back in the day in the Odeon group. So that was another area that developed for him. He always had an interest in theater and the arts as part of that. In the late 30s, he was an advisor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That, I think, came out of some of the corporate advice that he had been giving, and he was also advising governments at different stages and places. The tale that's told of one aspect of that was that Roosevelt was thanking him for his work and advising him, and said, the quote is, "I'm paying you money, what else can I do for you?" And Grandpa Cowan said, "Well, my son is turning 6 years old. His birthday's coming up. Maybe you could acknowledge that, send him a card." And so Uncle Doug Cowan has a card framed that is greetings from President Roosevelt on the occasion of his birthday when he was 6 years old. So that again became part of the story. Don't see any records of that extending past the start of the war. So it seemed to be in the pre-war era, but he would have been one of the early public relations connections for Roosevelt in those days.